Alishi. Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Schwab-Cartas. I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual cell film workshop entitled What's a Cell Film? Making Your Own Cell Film. For today's virtual workshop, I will be going through the steps on how to make your very own cell film, giving you tips on how to film, as well as just a brief background of the methodology itself and some of its roots. I'm also hoping to make this as accessible as possible for a wide age range. So if there's anything unclear or you want further tips or clarification on something, please feel free to post any of your questions to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And I will make sure to get back to you guys as soon as possible. I'd like to take a moment right now also to thank Dr. Claudia Mitchell, Rami Yorgis at the Institute of Human Development and Wellbeing, and everyone at the Participatory Cultures Lab at McGill who has taken the time to organize this incredible Cellphilm Festival and this workshop during this stressful and worrisome time, which, as we all know, continues to affect our lives in many different ways. So the hope today really for this workshop as well as the Cellphilm Festival is to find ways to bring us closer together as not only citizens of Montreal, but global citizens to share our unique and different ways of seeing the world, as well as how we're coping with this and how we can share different coping strategies with one another, as well as perhaps share unique little moments in our lives that we are perhaps more mindful of now that we have more time, while also asking ourselves questions as what is the role of technology, and looking at the ways that technology on one hand has at times been socially distancing, yet now more than ever is facilitating new ways of connecting with one another and finding really unique ways of also collaborating with one another in virtual space as we are doing today. So, but also just reminding one another that we're not alone, we're in this together, and we would love to hear your unique stories. So please join us for our 8th edition of the International Cellphilm Festival at McGill. So I just thought I would take a quick moment to just introduce myself. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Joshua Schwab-Cartas. I'm a language revitalization specialist. I specifically look at Indigenous languages, particularly our ancestral language known as Dijasa or Zapotec. I'm also a former student of Claudia Mitchell, who actually introduced me to this approach and this methodology of cell filming. That led me to explore that for my PhD project, which looked at how cell films can be a great way to not only preserve and revitalize our language, but also kind of entice and excite younger generation of speakers in our community to speak our language and also contribute and feel like they are contributing to the process of learning and revitalizing our language. So that is quite exciting. And another reason I think I was chosen today to facilitate this workshop is because myself, alongside Dr. Katie McEntee and Dr. Casey Burkholder, are actually the co-authors of a book entitled What's a Cell Film? Integrating Mobile Phone Technology into Participatory Visual Research and Activism, which is a wonderful book that explores the potential of cell filming, kind of examines whether cell filming is a new form of participatory video, or is it an approach onto itself, while also bringing different scholars from around the globe to share their experiences with mobile technology and what they're doing with this cell filming approach. But in addition to that, Katie, Casey, Claudia, and myself are all actually the founding members of the International Cellphilm Festival at McGill, which I'm excited to say is in its 8th edition. So again, thank you all for not only inviting me, but continuing this wonderful initiative at McGill. Now, in terms of what I have in store for the presentation, as you can see here, I'm going to quickly introduce what cell-filming is, and just a brief introduction about the methodology and some of its origins and how it's being taken up, as well as highlighting the importance of mobile technology in association to this methodology itself. And from there, I thought I would kind of underscore the importance of integrating visual ethics into your cell film praxis and always kind of being cognizant of these visual ethics when making your own cell film, whether it's at home or in a community. What else? I was also going to look at using apps, and whether you should or should not use them is not really what I'm going to answer. I think I'm just going to again, sensitize you to weighing your options, the pros and cons of using an app, as well as also suggesting a couple of the more popular apps that are being used right now to edit and upload videos. And then from there, I was going to actually introduce the entire process and walk you through the 5 different steps of making your very own cell film using a no editing required approach, as well as kind of integrating little tips on, film 101. And what I mean by that is kind of considering your lighting, being aware of the sound and how to kind of ensure and optimize the best sound quality of your video, as well as also giving you some tips if you're working with younger participants, whether they're students or your own kiddos at home. And then from there, just ways of looking and reflecting on our cell phone videos at the very end of this process. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm here to answer any questions, and please feel free to post them and send them our way, and I will try and get back to you, as I said, as soon as possible. So now on to the next slide. So what is a cell film? A cell film is a research method or methodology where participants use their own mobile technology, whether it's a smartphone, a cell phone, or a tablet, to respond to a prompt, question, in a community issue or challenge. The term cell film itself is actually a neologism coined by 2 South African media and communication scholars, Jonathan Docking and Keenan Tomaselli. However, their understanding of cell film is just a bit different from the cell film methodology and understanding I'm presenting to you today in this workshop. Their description of a cell film actually encompasses citizen journalism, documentary, film, fiction, the ordinary person show and tell films. And they position cell films more as a small production counter media, or digital dissemination, as they would say. Myself, as well as my colleagues, we look at cell film more in the same light as Claudia Mitchell and her colleagues, which is more a participatory visual method. And what we mean by that is that participatory video, like cell films, share the common goal, which is to engage individuals or communities in dialogue and critical consciousness in an effort to move towards social action. So the question for the slide is, what does technology got to do with it? Well, my answer is everything. Cell filming builds in response to participatory visual research, in particular participatory video. However, unlike traditional participatory video, which requires a video camera or a camcorder, cell film uses cell phones, tablets, and I would even argue digital cameras. And why is this significant? Well, the aim here is to use locally available technology to develop sustainable community-based action. Video cameras are expensive. They have a single purpose and often require specialized training in lighting, sound, and processing your video, whereas cell phones engage citizens' everyday media practices and are familiar tools with intuitive software, which allow for very basic to very complex video productions. And they're most likely present and accessible to research participants. And this is important because it can potentially disrupt that power inequality that can develop when communities are dependent on researchers for access to research technology. When working with images and visual methodologies in and with communities always requires the careful consideration of visual ethics. That is, the consideration of consent and ownership of the process and outputs alongside a situated understanding of visual texts. For today's presentation, and I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but I've broken it up into 6 categories that I'm going to briefly go over, and that is informed consent, ownership, dissemination and archiving, security and safety, construction of images, and audience. So informed consent needs to be ongoing and often relies on group dynamics. We also need to remember that consent not only entails consent to take or make visual images, but consent on how images will be used into the future. That is an important point to consider. And who has ownership of these images? Also, how can researchers make consent culturally appropriate to the community or participant? And are things being decided democratically? As far as ownership and dissemination, when work is done collaboratively, who owns and has the right to say how these visual products will be created and used? How will they be used, as I mentioned, in the future? And can the community be involved in archiving the process? And can the community have the right to say no to using these products in the future? In terms of security and safety, participants are typically proud of their work and want to be acknowledged. But also, you need to discuss the possible implications of being named, such as political persecution. So some of these options in terms of protecting your participants and ensuring their safety is no faces and creating pseudonyms. Also, collaborating means people can still participate without being filmed. That means they can be part of planning the process and storyboarding and creating different ideas for the actual process itself. The construction of images. And I thought right now I would actually quote John Prosser. In the still camera and movie camera replicate accurately what is set before them. However, importantly, they do so at our bidding. So it's important to remember that we need to be cognizant of the way that we use these images and where we present them and how we present them, which brings me to my last point, which is kind of the consideration of how visual data will be interpreted involves knowledge about the political, social, and cultural context in which the data will be viewed. What I mean by that is that sufficient background at times needs to be provided so people can consume the images in a way that is respectful to the community, but it also honors what the community or the participants had intended. And sometimes that does, as I mentioned, require contextualization of the film we are going to show to an audience that may not be familiar with the community or the participants' vision. So before we make our own Cellphilms, I thought it would be fun to show you some of the examples of some of the past entries of the Cellphilm Festival. I just kind of wanted to show you some of the creativity and some of the diversity of ways people have approached their own Cellphilms. So the very first Cellphilm we're going to see is entitled The Mountain by Patrick Richard, who was subsequently our third year second place winner. The second one, as I mentioned earlier, is done by Giovanni de Jesus Rodriguez Carzola, who is actually a participant in my PhD project and is highlighting aspects of our Zapotec culture. And he was actually the second place winner of our fourth year Cellphilm Festival. And last, a very fun Cellphilm entry entitled Why I Came to McGill by Camille Kaufman, which was actually um, one of our very first entries. So please enjoy, and I will be back with you shortly.
When I first moved to Montreal, the mountain was the only place where I felt I could catch my breath. The pace of the city overwhelmed me, and I found myself frequently running to the mountain in an attempt to leave it all behind. Here I felt connected to the familiar scene. Here I could collect my thoughts and feel significant. However, in my attempts to be alone, I soon found family. The sacred ceremonies of the tam-tams enabled me to connect with the culture. Frisbee with friends, afternoon hikes, the mountain encouraged me to embrace my new surroundings. Like the changing of seasons, my transition was slow but noticeable. I found more reasons to journey to the confines of the mountain. But now I was not alone. I was part of the bigger picture, a player on the team. And when I set aside my reluctance to change, I was able to embrace the benefits of expanding my identity. The community of the mountain introduced me to what life in the city could be like. When I welcomed this idea, I welcomed the notion that this is where I belong.
Cavado, bisa ni si, gana cabe de que diga, ni bulene, cabe ni bola, so de no, pasa huelo, irá cabe, cadi guli, di cabe di ya, o di ya sano,
Gracias a Dios, la pedirme oportunidad, sin máquinas.
Yo bordo el piel de ángel y hay otra tela que es de terciopelo. El terciopelo es bien duro y yo no puedo bordar eso.
Diga esa abuela tu ballista, mi saluta hija, mi canachi.
So for today's workshop, we will be using a no editing required approach to creating our Cellphilms. And as the title suggests, no editing is required to creating your fully finished Cellphilm. So what this means is that we have two variations, the shoot, pause, shoot, which requires carefully planned out shots, or the second variation, which is a bit more complicated, which is the one-shot shoot. That is shooting your entire Cellphilm without pausing. But as I mentioned here, it does require careful storyboarding and planning. However, there is a caveat. If you are using an Apple product, you will unfortunately have to use an app, and I recommend one of these two apps because it does give you the capability of being able to pause and continue to shoot, and pause and continue to shoot. And both of these apps actually do allow you a little bit of editing capabilities, and also include some filters if that's the approach you want to take. Which also brings me to App or not to app. And I mean, like anything, there are many pros and cons that need to be kind of weighed out. One of the pros, of course, is that you have info and editing capacity, and it links you automatically to social media. However, some of the cons is the time limits, aesthetic constraints, ownership, and advertising. So these are some things that need to be considered carefully if you do choose to use an app to create your Cellphilm. Now, if you do want to use an app, here's some of the apps that are free and they're available out there. And the first two are available on both Apple and on Android products. Both of them are pretty much the same. They allow for editing capacity, filters, and also just quick and easy download and upload to any social media page that you may be on. Of course, there's also iMovie, but that is just restricted to Apple products. And finally, there is YouTube. And some of you may or may not know, but there are very, very basic editing capabilities available to you on the YouTube beta version, which just allows you essentially to trim and cut and paste and create very basic transitions for your videos. So these are a couple of the apps that are out there that are free and are available, but by no means is this an exhaustive list of apps, and I will post a link to different apps on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel as well. So let's move on to starting our own Cellphilm. So let's get started making your own Cellphilm. I'm going to walk you guys through the following 5 steps. Step 1 is brainstorming the prompt. Step 2, storyboarding. Step 3 is actually Cellphilming. And then step 4 is uploading and screening your videos. And step 5 finally is reflection and future action. So from there, before we start any Cellphilm, it's important to do a little bit of troubleshooting before you start. And what I mean by that is make sure that your devices, whether they're phones or tablets or iPods, are fully charged. And also another thing to make sure of is make sure that your device actually has enough storage before you actually start shooting. Nothing worse than getting halfway through your Cellphilm and realizing your battery is going to die or you don't have enough storage, kind of ruining that whole process of making that perfect Cellphilm that we strive to achieve. So now to our next slide. Working with kids and Cellphones, I do have a bit of experience working with adolescents and younger youth from the ages of 9 to about 12. But I think now that circumstances are different, we also are wanting to invite younger children to be able to participate or to do something fun at home with their parents. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of mention before we start the process is that it's important to introduce your child to the idea of a cell phone as an educational tool, as something that is to be used under the guidance of parental supervision, and of course with certain boundaries and limits that are of course up to the discretion of the parent or the educator carrying out the cell phone process. Also kind of explaining to your young participants the potential risks that come with cell phones, but also teaching them that in their hands they have a very important and powerful device that allows them to learn and to express important messages to the world, but also to stay connected with their friends and loved ones as well. So the idea here really is to maybe take a moment to introduce this device and to destigmatize the cell phone as something that is a time waster or merely a form of entertainment, and re-signify it as a learning or educational tool. And I think this will also help parents who may be a bit hesitant about introducing their children to cell phones. And again, of course, this is all at the discretion of parents and teachers. So having said that, I will be giving a couple tips of how to kind of get your younger participants involved in the process of making a cell film if you so choose to make a cell film with them. So before I share some basic tips of filmmaking 101, I thought I'd share some pointers on introducing the process of filming to younger participants or anyone such as elders who may be unfamiliar, with making cell phone videos. So first is introduce the camera in a way that is suitable to the age group that you're working with, explaining what the goal and the purpose of this process of self filming is. And second, kind of instruct the child or the elder how to hold the camera, how to switch it on and how to switch it off, how to start and how to stop filming, as well as kind of instructing them how they can review their footage after they've made their short little video. I know the temptation is to hold the cell phone, but it's important to give it to the participant, whether they're a young child or an elder, so they start feeling confident in their ability to make their own video. From there, maybe ask the participant to kind of film the person in front of them, maybe yourself or anybody else who's in the household right now, and ask them perhaps the two following questions, very basic: what is your name and what do you like to do for fun? For example, I mean, this isn't prescriptive. You can choose whatever questions you want to get your filmer to ask the person in front of them. And the whole idea is for them to feel confident and more comfortable with the process of filming, and then they can kind of review the process itself. So now, in terms of filming 101, it's important to always consider your lighting. And so you want to shoot with the sun behind you, or else your images will get bleached. And always try also to shoot your cell phone video in landscape mode. And what I mean by that is holding your cell phone horizontally as opposed to vertically. And the reason you do this is to ensure having a full screen, as opposed to when you shoot vertically, your film itself will be encased by two vertical black lines on both sides, unless that is kind of aesthetically what you're going for. Also, framing it right. So what I mean by framing it right is leave a bit of space above the head and cut your frame shot at the chest if you are doing interviews. And this way you can ensure, in case you go back and you want to include subtitles, they can be added later if needed. Also, shoot in thirds. And what I mean by thirds is that it helps to kind of draw the viewer's eye into the image and place more emphasis on the subject that you're filming, whether that's a landscape or that's somebody that is being interviewed. So ideally, the empty space that's left there should be the direction the subject is looking or heading into. Don't walk. Walking will only make your video shaky, so try and find a good angle that captures what you want to record before you start filming. And that, again, will come through the process of storyboarding. But it's also, if you need to walk, try and walk quite slowly. But I don't recommend it. Also, keep it steady. Brace your elbow with your non-shooting hand, or keep your shooting elbow close to your body so you can steady the camera, kind of ensuring a nice steady shot. Also, one of the things that cannot be underestimated in film is sound. I've talked to many filmmakers, and many of them would argue that sound is almost more important than the film itself, especially when you're trying to get an important message across to your audience. So to ensure the best quality of sound in a cell film is to be as close as possible to whatever you're shooting as you can, just to make sure you capture the sound and to ensure the highest quality of sound. So now on to our next slide. So step 1, brainstorm the prompt. So for this step, I'm actually asking you to consider two factors. That is actually thinking about the prompt and getting together with your participants or your partner or whoever you're working with to kind of think about what your film is going to be about based on the prompt. Today's prompt is, what are you experiencing in the time of distancing? In terms of a prompt itself, in case you are thinking about hosting or facilitating your own workshop with Cellphilms, the issue of the prompt needs to be considered very carefully. Since every project is different in context and goals, it's difficult to be prescriptive. So the prompt actually helps kind of structure and guide what the video will be about. So it's important that the prompt be open-ended, easy to comprehend, but also it needs to be specific to the topic or the issue that you're exploring or trying to address. So as I mentioned, today's prompt is, what are you experiencing in the time of distancing? So if you are not working with young participants, go ahead and start brainstorming your prompt and start thinking about what this question means to you and how you want to think about your video visually. If you are working with younger participants and this prompt does seem to be a bit too difficult, perhaps sit down with them and kind of break it down, give them more context, and ask them something about what they're going through right now, and perhaps that might help you create a more age-appropriate prompt to help your young participants kind of address this issue. So one of the prompts that I actually used with my young kiddo is, what is the best part of your day? Another one was a day in the life of, or what are you experiencing during this time of distancing is also is the prompt itself. So let's move on. So the second step in creating your Cellphilm is storyboarding. It's a step that is absolutely crucial to successfully creating your own Cellphilm. It is kind of onerous at times, in my experience. A lot of people want to just get filming, which is great, and I think you need to continue to have that enthusiasm to create a great product, but you can't do so without proper storyboarding. I'm kind of reminded right now by a great quote by Stanley Kubrick, who once said, "If it can be written, it can be filmed." While this quote sounds great and it does make sense, there are a couple things that we need to keep in mind. You can't film an idea. You can film people, places, and things. So what I mean by that is that we need to keep in mind what we're going to be filming. So that means what is the idea? Who are we interviewing? Where, the location, when, is it past or present, and why? What is the purpose? What is the goal and the overall message? So start your storyboard by grabbing a blank piece of paper and creating 4 to 6 sections to create a plan for your Cellphilm shoot. And since we're going to be using a no editing required approach, it's important to keep in mind that your very first shot will be the title of your Cellphilm. So you could either write it down on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. You can get completely creative, but it needs to be the title so your viewer knows what the title of your Cellphilm is. And of course, the very, very last shot is going to be the credits of your Cellphilm, who was involved, what music was included, and so forth. So other things to kind of keep in mind is, who is your audience? What story would you like to tell? Will you use narration, subtitles, or music? And which images will you use? Will they be still? Will they be moving? Will it be fictional representations? So these are all good things to keep in mind when you're creating your storyboard to ensure a more successful Cellphilm at the very end. Also, if you will be working with younger participants, they may have trouble with this, so I would just kind of encourage you to maybe perhaps you draw out what their ideas are as they explain them to you to be able to better kind of facilitate the process of storyboarding and eventually creating their own Cellphilm. So next is the filming itself. So now on to the fun part, filming your Cellphilm. So as I mentioned in the first slide in terms of filming 101, some things to kind of keep in mind is be aware of your sound, and how we ensure better quality of sound is just to try and be as close as possible to whatever you're filming. Also, I mean, this is an obvious one, but cell phones and mobile devices tend to capture a lot of background sound. So you want to maybe try and find a quieter space to film so you avoid kind of any confusion or any excess sound kind of taking away from your overall message. And also, again, framing your shots and being aware of the shots. So have fun and good luck. And yeah, take around, 20 minutes, half an hour. And kind of tinker with where you want to film, and think about the shots and the kind of locations within your space that will be the most appropriate to film. So now that you've finished your Cellphilm, the next step is uploading and screening. So this really depends on the context that you are working in. So the uploading is something that is not necessary. It is obviously optional. Let's think back to the idea of visual ethics. Who owns the actual piece is something that is always important to consider when working in a community or with participants. And asking them and kind of collectively trying to come to an agreement as to what you want to do next, how you want to store it, how you want to archive it for the future, whether you're going to upload it to YouTube or whether it's going to be part of a community archive. Is something that needs to be discussed with your participants. From there, you also want to take some time to screen your Cellphilm. And these are just some questions that I like to use with my participants, and is getting them to think about what they saw in their Cellphilm, and asking them what they liked best about their video and what they could change if there was something they would like to change. So another thing that I was thinking about here is that if you're working with young participants, depending of course on their age group, I'm talking here preschoolers up to grade 1, 2, 3, perhaps it's easier for them to kind of express themselves through a chart. And what I mean by that is that perhaps develop a chart with 2 columns, one with a smiley face, one with a sad face, and they can kind of put a tick while you come up with questions about what part of their Cellphilm they liked, and you can kind of write it down, or you can put a little check mark or whatever. But the idea here is to kind of help them better express what they liked, what they saw in their Cellphilm, and kind of better facilitate that process. Now that you've screened and decided whether you're uploading your video, perhaps you might have changed some things, is the next and final step of today's workshop. That is the reflection and future action. So I asked you guys to consider, what did you learn from making this Cellphilm today? What was interesting, what wasn't interesting, and also think about who you want to show this Cellphilm to. Do you want to just show it to your loved ones, or is there somebody else you want to address? Maybe it's an MP, or maybe it's a community leader of sorts. And why do you want to show them this video? Are some of the questions that kind of come up as not only reflection, but as future action. Also, what did you value more today? Was it the process of planning out your Cellphilm, thinking about it in a very participatory manner, or was it the final product, or was it both? Either way, I want to congratulate you all for participating today in today's virtual workshop and completing your first, or perhaps your second or third. I'm not sure what Cellphilm this may be for you guys, but either way, thank you for joining me today in this virtual workshop. As I said throughout this presentation, if you do have any questions or you have any comments or anything you want to share with us, please feel free to do so on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And again, thank you for participating and being part of this virtual workshop during this very trying time. And again, I want to thank everybody who invited me to be part of this incredible initiative, but who is also carrying out this incredible project, especially during a time of need. And lastly, just for your own personal reference, I thought I'd share a couple references here that you can just kind of look at. And if you do want them, please, again, feel free, and I can send you the links to the references in a private message, or just upload them if anybody is interested to our pages. So thank you so much for participating and working with us today. I wish you guys the best of luck. We can't wait to see those Cellphilms, and stay safe, and thank you again.